Okay, so I'm going to talk about ageing from a work perspective. I'm primarily going to sketch out some research that we're planning to do in the next few years. So this is a recent article about older workers ending up on the scrap heap. And this is a challenge that we are increasingly facing because of issues like discrimination of older people. How do you keep people in work? It's an incredibly important question, and I'll just very quickly show you this slide here. And that's China at the top there, and what you can see, if this thing works, see? If you see 2020, you can see this is the population of people over 65, and you see this huge increase by 2050, and we all know that. That's why we're here. But if you look at this slide now, this is working age people. So if you see 2020 and then 2050, what you, of course, observe is there's hardly any increase at all. And so the fundamental issue is that the proportion of working people to older people is rapidly diminishing. And the Australian Treasury, for example, is very, very worried about this and has written a lot about how, from a purely economic perspective, it is absolutely critical to keep mature workers at work longer. Now, we can talk about health effects and social effects and all that sort of thing, but from a purely economic perspective, we need to be asking the question, how can people stay at work longer? So that's the first question. And that's not an easy question because, as I've already mentioned, mature workers, there is often discrimination. They also have grandchildren and other interesting, wonderful things to do in their lives, so why stay at work? So there are some challenges around keeping people longer in the workplace. What's also really important is you don't just want people staying in the workplace, for example, because they have to for financial reasons. You actually want people to be productive and healthy as they stay in the workplace. So we need to be looking at not just keeping people, but thinking about how can we ensure that this is not damaging their health, this is enhancing their health perhaps, and also that they're working productively and effectively. So these are the two, or at least some of the questions that we'll be addressing in our research. Now, you could answer these questions by looking at the national level, by looking at the policies. For example, retirement age is a very obvious one. You want to keep people in work longer, extend the retirement age. And tax policies and all those other things. Now, I know almost nothing about them. Those are for other people to think about. There are also individual level questions that we can ask, and in a sense, Julie's work is more thinking about what are individual choices and how do people make those and so on and so forth. The focus that we have is what can organisations do? What can we do in the workplace around facilitating people staying at work? Even within that question, there's many things one could look at. So obviously I could spend, a lot of time talking about the discrimination issues and how one might address those. We could look at issues of leadership and how it might be necessary to change the way we lead a mature workforce. But what I'm going to focus on is work design, because that's the topic that I'm currently looking at. So I'm going to give you literally a 2-minute guide on what work design is. So sorry, it's going to be quick. But work design is basically, it's about what your tasks, responsibilities and activities are in your work and how they're organised. So we all have work designs. If we have autonomy in our work and if we have a reasonable workload and we have some variety and we're learning new skills, those are all things we would call a good work design. If we are micromanaged, working 15 hours a day, under lots and lots of pressure, etc., those we'll probably have not such a good work design. When we talk about work design, we can identify that there's physical aspects. Tasks have physical components. Quick example, if you're working with chemicals, you might get exposure to toxic fumes. Work has biomechanical aspects, lifting, for example. Work has cognitive aspects, so think about, for example, people at the airport security who are monitoring, they're having to concentrate, so there's a cognitive demand. And also work has psychosocial characteristics. And these are these aspects that I actually already mentioned, like autonomy and variety. These are sort of psychological aspects of work that we know really make a difference. The most important thing that you need to know about work design is that you can redesign work. It's not set in stone how your job should be designed, even though managers often act like it is. You can actually redesign work, and you can make work more meaningful, more productive if you do. You could get rid of certain tasks. You could have job rotation to give people rest, for example. You could give people breaks. You could actually train supervisors to delegate instead of micromanaging, for example. So those would be examples of work redesign. So when it comes to ageing and work design, then how do things change as people age, and what might that mean for the sort of work that might attract them and keep them? So first, the bad news, you guys already know this. There's obviously a lot of evidence that physically things happen. There are sensory changes in our hearing and our vision. You become more susceptible to temperature change as you age. There are changes in your immune system, strength declines, balance, aerobic capacity, etc. What does this mean, though, when it comes to work that people do? Well, here's some example implications. So, for example, there may be more health and safety risks if people keep doing some of the same tasks because, for example, they're not as strong as they used to be. It might affect communication if people have hearing decline, for example. It might mean that some of the more extreme work conditions some people face, like shift work or working in very hot environments, those things might become more challenging because people's bodies have changed. Some tasks might not be possible, and there may be some increasing chance of health issues doing some of the tasks. It's really important to mention, and this goes back to Julie's point, there's huge variation across people. So this is not about designing a job based on stereotypes. It's about designing work that's going to fit with mature workers, and mature workers are different too. But these are some of the average changes. Very quickly, cognitively, and this comes to Paul's talk, what we know is that there is a decline in fluid intelligence over time with age. So this is the working memory type of intelligence. But we also know that crystallised intelligence, which is sort of what some people might think of as wisdom, increases as people age. So again, this might change the sort of tasks and things that mature workers might be interested in and might be good at. So we might want to think about that. Let's come to psychosocial aspects. As people, this is in a sense more some good news, I think. As people get older, there is evidence that they become more intrinsically focused, and this comes back to your point, Julie. They care more about autonomy, they care more about relationships, they're less interested in pay, and I'm speaking here on average, less interested in pay on average, they're less interested in training and development on average, makes sense, because you've got a shorter working span left. They have higher generative motives. What this means is that as people mature, they care about making a difference more. They care more about the legacy that they're leaving. They, of course, often have a need for more flexibility because of the caregiving role, increasingly looking after grandchildren and also your ageing parents. As people get older, and this is the same as what Julie said, people are happier, actually, on average, more positive aspect, better able to cope, actually more emotional stability, and actually more conscientious. So all these positive things, again, have implications for how we might design work. So what we call enriched work designs, which is where you've got autonomy in work, where you've got interesting things that people are doing, actually might be more important, might be a way of attracting and retaining workers. Mature workers may particularly value things like mentoring opportunities. Makes sense, because they've got that generative motive. They might be better at coping with stress, for example. So in summary, what we need to start thinking about in our organisations is how we can redesign work to fit the needs of mature workers. And they might be physical redesigns, they might be biomechanical redesigns, cognitive redesigns, or, as I've suggested at the end, these more psychosocial changes, such as giving people more autonomy in their work. Very last couple of seconds. Basically, just to say that we are, just next week actually, this CPAR mentioned down here, which is a Centre of Excellence in Population Ageing Research, which is a centre run out of Sydney. We just got 7 years more funding from the government, and I will be focusing on this issue of work and how we can make work more attractive and healthier and more productive for mature workers. And we're going to focus particularly on what we call interventions. So that is actually creating some type of change and then assessing what impact does that change actually have, because actually there are very, very few studies that have actually done that. So hopefully, if anyone is at all interested in participating in that research, any organisations, more than happy to hear and talk with you about those opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sharon. We've got 2 or 3 minutes for some questions.
Just seeing if you've got a watch there, by the way.
I'm listening to the frog in the corner. We'll start over here, please.
Yes, what work have you done with potential employers in changing their mindset in the first place to get people employed at an older age?
Yeah, I mean, it's an obvious, they're not going to embark on these sort of interventions unless they understand why, okay? And there's a few different reasons that one can put forward. And in fact, more and more organisations are getting interested in this topic because they're realising they have an ageing workforce and are realising that they, that that's what they've got and that's what they've got to work with. So they're becoming more interested in this issue. But the arguments we would make would be around the value that they can get from harnessing this talent pool rather than letting the talent pool just walk off and play golf all day. So the value to them from an economic productive perspective. But you can also make arguments around more societally oriented arguments about what's the role of good work in facilitating successful ageing. And you can also make legal arguments. Actually, organisations have legal responsibilities around how they treat people at work. So you can probably get organisations on board in different ways. But we would always first try to help them to understand the value for them and their organisational success if they're able to harness that mature talent pool. So,
we have quite a lot more comments that would like to be made. So
okay, you want to do more
quickly, just very briefly, we'll capture each of these comments.
There's actually currently government funding that will pay employers money to employ people over 65. So that currently exists.
Okay, thank you.
Are you looking at on-call careers and career redevelopment?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My particular interest is in looking at the flexible work arrangement at organisation in terms of legislative practice and best practice, and particularly looking at it through gender and cultural lenses, and how organisations, particularly universities, can facilitate it.
And Carol?
And are you looking at the impact of technology in the workplace? Because obviously it changes so quickly and a lot of older people find that very, very difficult, and a lot of employers are really, it's easier for them to employ someone young who already knows how to navigate technology in the workplace.
yeah. I mean, those are all excellent questions. I think that's all the questions. Oh, sorry, that was...
Oh, so sorry.
What kind of shifts at a national policy level would be beneficial in all workers?
Sorry, what sort of...
Sorry, what shifts at a national policy level?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Questions?
Okay.
Good luck.
In terms of the last one, like I said, my focus is actually on what organisations can do practically. There can be policy level shifts like changing the retirement age, as I said earlier. But my focus is on what organisations can do. So, and then were questions around looking at things like gender. For example, gender obviously interacts with often the need for providing care of ageing parents, which many mature workers face. And that because, still it's the case that it's often the women that are looking after older. So actually we have a whole stream of research just on that topic, which I haven't even mentioned here today. It's just not enough time. And questions like technology and so on, they're all things that we're looking at. Just haven't got time to address them all today. But the bottom line is that there isn't a lot of actual practical research where something is tried and then systematically measured to see has it worked, and that's what we're really keen to do. So, as I said, if organisation is doing anything, we'd love to get involved in evaluating. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sharon.